I am the lead singer of Nova Heart. I'm Helen, and this is.
I'm 宗灿，我是宗灿吉他手。
他是中餐吉他手. Anyway, we're from Beijing, China, and yeah, this is our first time at South by. South by Experience is started. Our first show is South by. We showed up. We're all like enthusiasm and green. Before we showed up, we had friends who were in bands who had been here a couple of times. Some of them like 4 or 5 years, and then every time they were like, "So you're going to South by? Is it your first time?" And we go, "Yeah." And they're like, and like this little dirty smile on their face. And I was like, "What? I'm just telling you, don't just yeah, it's crazy." But they didn't want to elaborate, so I guess they had something that I was going to experience later. In our first show, we showed up at the gig at the venue, and they were running behind because the sound guy was a junkie, and he was basically junked up, and he was like kind of incohesively holding his head in the corner. And he had like some scars on his face, like he just fall face forward into something, and he was so skinny. And then, the guy who was running the show came up to us like, "Okay, guys, bad news. We're running a little bit behind." It's like, "How behind?" 2 hours. Like, all right, so what are we gonna do now? It's like, well, we're getting a new sound guy, and that person's coming in. So other than that, we've had some nuts experiences. Sixth Street is insane. It's like a mix of Mardi Gras and the biggest fraternity party you can imagine, and a lot of distortion guitar. A lot of distortion guitar. We were actually kind of a little bit intimidated because we don't use so much distortion. And we were just passing all these venues and thinking, okay, they're going to not like us because we don't actually use our distortion pedals. A lot of people were telling me that the showcase was going to be shit, and then their side shows were going to be good. And actually, our showcase went really, really well. We had some hairy experiences with our side shows, but it's our first time, so it's just getting our feet wet. And the showcase actually went really amazing. The sound guy was like cohesive. It was. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He gave us a good sound. I was really surprised and happy. In China, I've been kind of involved in the music scene for almost a decade now. So it's nice to see that it's getting to the point where it's actually um, starting to come out of its shell. Before there was a music scene, it was very much underground domestically, and then really nobody cared about you outside of China. The music was a little bit more difficult to understand because people were taking influences from only like these CDs that they could find in like the waste bins of like in America. If you throw away a CD, it gets recycled as waste plastic, and the whole shipment gets sent to China. So like in the big trash bins before they actually go into a melting factory, all of these CDs actually get picked through by like dozens and dozens of like college students, and they go through these CDs and they pay for them by the pound, and then take them to the universities and sell them on the ground. And this is where people got exposure to music. There was no advertisement. There was no information about what they were getting. They couldn't read what was on the CD, and so they just all basically had this kind of jumbled weird mix of mostly grunge actually music, and yeah, I mean 4AD got a lot of exposure in China. More people knew about 4AD than they did about a lot of mainstream artists. So so the influences are very strange in China at the time. Now the internet, because everybody just, in a weird way, the piracy has really helped China because it's helped it, in a way, get more exposure to music around the world than it would have gotten if it was tightly controlled by the record companies. In a way, Chinese kids who are into music, they get a lot more music than kids in the West because they have so much access to it. However, now it's also not as pure. Like somehow there was definitely people didn't expect to make money from music, so just doing music in a way in the mid 90s, late 90s, it was something that you had to fully commit to and expect nothing in return. So now that people kind of like it is getting more commercialized, there are more festivals. There's probably going to be like 100 festivals in China this year. Bands are starting to deal with the world, and that's why they come to South by Southwest. It is for all of us a lot of everybody's kind of going around, and it's like kind of entering the mouth of the dragon, because like here you have every aspect, from douchebag to cool bands. Sometimes leaning more toward the D element, but there's also a lot of audience, and so it's also very, very difficult to get attention. So I think a lot of musicians in the West, they get a lot more training early on, and they get a lot more training in music composition early on. So for instance, I was classically trained, so you learn to read, you learn to read music, you learn to understand chords and other elements of it. So on an education basis, the West definitely provides better music education. And however, in China, because it is more scattered, I sometimes feel like I'm a step ahead and a step behind, because sometimes the kids, they jump over all of that, and there's something a lot more raw about it. And that rawness really is, if you think about every single musical form, it didn't have a forefather or a set number of rules. They all came from, like, honestly, people bumbling about. I mean, music came about. People could, like, stretch wires across their porch and play different notes. It wasn't because they had a really expensive teacher and a really expensive guitar. So I think in that way, I admire the Chinese kids who kind of had nothing to begin with, because they can go further in their way of creating something completely new, versus I am still slightly hindered by my Western background. But being in China has helped the last few years really kind of open up a lot of ideas for me. We're going to be releasing something in April 27th, which is an EP called Beautiful Boys, dedicated to some beautiful boys I know. And yes, you're now on the cover, bitches. Sorry, I had to say something. Yeah, and afterwards, I have another album coming up probably at the end of the year. We're touring Canada, we're touring Europe. We're going to go back to the studio and do some more songwriting, because we have some new ideas and usual band stuff. We might take a vacation. Like, I really want to go to Tahiti, but nobody ever books a tour in Tahiti. Like.
Maybe you should.
Yeah, I could. Like, we could. That's one thing. Emerging markets, guys. I know I've been hearing that term a lot since being in South by, because I'm an emerging market. But yeah. I mean, like, I think emerging markets should also include places like Tahiti and the Philippines, Vietnam, because they're just a heck of a lot. Like India, I like to go to India. And we've been touring the world lately, and you can get fast food everywhere. That's why I want to go to India, because I want it to be dirty and cool and have, like, people in sari, like saris, whatever they're called, like, yeah. End of conversation. Yeah.
And will we see you back down in Australia anytime soon? The feedback seemed to be very fantastic from the shows you did down there.
I'd really like to be back. We had we didn't get a booking in Melbourne though, so like we almost did, but then some stuff happened and we didn't. So if next time, I like to play in Melbourne, because I liked Melbourne. I actually, ironically, people were kind of making fun of me. I liked Adelaide. Yeah, exactly. You're like, really? No, it was really, people there are really sweet, and we met some really cool, like, magician dude called Charlie. Charlie, this is a shout out to you. He's a Turkish guy living in Australia with a ponytail who does magic at casinos and children's parties. He's really cool. Yeah, thanks, Charlie. It's a great time.
Well, we hope to see you down there again soon, and looking forward to hearing the EP.
Yeah, me too.